Beneath Disagreement by Watkins. The trigger. It was 2019, just mere months before what would be known as the COVID-19 pandemic would literally shut down the world. I'm working the night shift. I have hearing protection earmuffs that connect to my phone. I'm listening to YouTube videos. I had just put atheist into the search bar hours ago, and down the rabbit hole I went. You're probably thinking, that is a weird thing to search on YouTube. Without any context, you're right. Let me give you some context. Days prior, I had one of the more unhinged interactions with a coworker of mine. We had a minor disagreement. I do not recall what this disagreement was, but I know it was not of high importance to either of us. The next words that he said were, "You just have to have faith." He was indicating that I should trust his judgment. My response was, "I don't have faith." I didn't say more than those 4 words. A volcano erupted. His yelling echoed through the production area and carried its way through the offices. "You have to have faith," he screamed louder than a fan at an NFL game. After that came a just as loud threat of a one-way ticket to hell. I froze. What else could I do? To this day, I can't think of a better response. My response was to say and do nothing. I sulked to the restroom and thought about what to do. I choose silence. Luckily for me, so did he. Down the rabbit hole. The YouTube search makes a little bit more sense? Great, let's continue on. This search led me to The Atheist Experience and Matt Dillahunty, Jimmy Snow, Talk Heathen, and Logic. These were all entertaining to a degree, however. None of these provided answers to the questions I had. Why did my coworker react the way he did? What can I do now? Then I came across Owen Morgan, also known as Telltale. Some of his videos focused on the psychology of believers and religions. This provided more answers than the other channels. More importantly, I came across his video titled How to Deprogram a Religious Extremist. At the time, the title didn't bother me. Today, I would prefer it not described this way. It implies a dynamic where one person is positioned as the authority, while the other is treated as deficient or in need of correction. This led me to search for Street Epistemology. I found videos by Anthony Magnabosco. I listened to every single video on his channel in a matter of weeks. Street Epistemology is a conversational approach built around asking questions rather than making claims. Instead of arguing for a position, it examines how a belief is held, what reasons support it, how confident the believer is, and what might change that confidence. There was no yelling, no threats, no hierarchy, just curiosity. Watching these conversations felt like witnessing a social glitch get patched in real time. What captivated me wasn't that people changed their minds. They often didn't, not on camera anyway. It was like a debate, but it cuts through the stuff that got in the way. It is a way to get to the root of the differences in beliefs without submitting, exploding, or silencing. It felt like a solution. Building a practice. Building a practice, I created a YouTube channel. YouTube.com at Watkins SE. This was my channel dedicated to having conversations with people about their beliefs. I have over 120 videos talking with various people about various beliefs. This is only a fraction of all the street epistemology style conversations I have had. Many others went unrecorded or were in text form. I have spoken twice at the Secular Student Alliance Conference about street epistemology. I have held numerous online street epistemology workshops. I hosted The Thought Process, an online call-in show with the greatest co-host to exist, Today David. I have been featured many times on the Street Epistemology podcast. I believe this could change the world. I was now aware of a conversational method to understand anyone I disagreed with. But not only that, I had a method to help mutually examine the validity of claims made and just maybe change a few minds. I imagined a world where everyone knew about street epistemology and used it. In that imagined world, disagreement would no longer be a threat. People would understand each other. If people believed in things that were untrue, through conversation, they would stop believing said things. Imagine for yourself a world like this. This would be a much better world. One where instead of getting angry at politics, we could get angry at the local sports teams. I assumed that when people were exposed to street epistemology, like me, they would want more of it. They would want to use it. I was mistaken. The ideal versus reality. When comparing street epistemology to the tactics of Matt Dillahunty, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, and Jordan Peterson, there is a clear distinction. The Dillahunties are saying, I am right and you are mistaken. While using street epistemology, both parties are on the same team. Street epistemology doesn't ask you to defend a conclusion or attack someone else's. It is about examining the thought process together. There is no scoreboard and no winner to declare. It seems obvious to me that this was the superior approach, and that once people saw the contrast, they would abandon the old ways on their own. I was carrying an unspoken premise. People want truth more than comfort, status, or victory. I didn't know this at the time. You cannot sell the idea of curiosity or critical reflection to people who are invested in winning, feeling safe, or maintaining control, no matter how obviously better it seems from the outside. People say they value truth. Ask anyone and 99% of people will say yes, as long as it is something they actually care about. Nobody cares what color socks you're wearing, but they probably want to know how much money is in their bank account, or if their home has working smoke alarms. 3 archetypes. I have found 3 archetypes relating to deeply held beliefs and how people interact in the world with them. They are the fighter, the avoider, and the gatekeeper. The fighter. The fighter thrives off winning. The fighter will argue about anything and everything. This was the archetype that embodied my coworker. Although the fighter isn't required to be that loud or expressive, all that is required from this archetype is the desire to fight. The fighter loves the thrill of victory. Think of it like conversational skydiving. They are energized by conflict and entertained by outrage. Street epistemology, with its slow, reflective questioning, can frustrate the fighter because it removes the headbutting. It doesn't give them a scoreboard or an enemy to conquer. The fighter is not inherently malicious. They just crave head-to-head engagement. This trait likely evolved as a social mechanism. In small, high-stakes groups, asserting dominance, defending territory, or winning arguments could secure resources, mates, or status, giving fighters a survival advantage. Another example of the fighter is a colleague of mine in the street epistemology community. Let's call him Adam. In one conversation, we were discussing possible ways wars end specifically. What options realistically exist once violence is already underway? I was explicit that I didn't know the answers and was trying to think through bad options versus worse ones. Adam didn't hear uncertainty. He heard a moral opponent. Almost immediately, the conversation escalated. My questions were interpreted as justifications. My lack of certainty was reframed as endorsement. Within minutes, Adam was no longer engaging with what I was asking, but with what he believed I represented. His responses grew sharper, more absolutist. He invoked moral lines that could not be crossed, accused me of defending atrocities I rejected, and framed the exchange as a confrontation between decency and depravity. What mattered most was not resolving confusion, but standing firmly on the right side and opposing the perceived threat. When the emotional intensity peaked, Adam disengaged entirely, not because clarity had been reached, but because the conflict had run its course. This is the fighter archetype, not someone who enjoys cruelty, but someone who becomes combative when he feels others are hypothetically threatened. The avoider. The avoider is motivated by comfort and emotional safety, the polar opposite of my coworker and Adam. The avoider fears confrontation, dislikes tension, and will often shut down or retreat when beliefs are challenged. They may nod in agreement even if they think or feel differently. To the avoider, truth is only valuable when it doesn't threaten their relationships or peace of mind. Street epistemology challenges them precisely because it introduces the risk of discomfort, which they instinctively avoid. Over time, this trait likely helped human groups maintain cohesion and reduce internal conflict. In dangerous or resource-scarce environments, avoiding unnecessary fights or challenges could preserve alliances, protect families, and increase the chances of survival for the group as a whole. The gatekeeper. The gatekeeper is motivated by control and the maintenance of social order. Gatekeepers set the rules for what can be said, believed, or questioned within their group, often enforcing boundaries subtly through authority, norms, or social pressure. Unlike the fighter, they don't seek the thrill of conflict, and unlike the avoider, they don't retreat. They actively shape the environment to their advantage. This trait likely evolved to help human groups manage cooperation and coordination. By establishing hierarchies and enforcing norms, gatekeepers reduced chaos, ensured group survival, and maintained access to shared resources. They were the organizers of early social systems, keeping the group functional even when individuals clashed. An example of the gatekeeper comes from an experience I had on the University of Wisconsin Green Bay campus. I stood in a public space holding a sign that read, "Should I be woke?" The topic was political, and I had a camera and a microphone, but the sign itself was the only prompt. I wasn't making a claim or advancing an argument. I was inviting conversation. Many of the students who reacted were heavily left-leaning and appeared to assume that the question signaled a religious or right-wing agenda. I am neither. Before any interaction even occurred, plans were made to remove me from campus. Some students discussed intentionally yelling near me to disrupt the audio and video. Others reported me to the dean. The response wasn't to challenge the question, ask what I meant, or engage with the idea at all, but to shut down the conditions that made the question possible. The concern wasn't whether the idea was true, harmful, or mistaken. It was that it existed outside approved political boundaries. This is the gatekeeper archetype in action. It prioritizes control of the environment over engagement with content. In such contexts, questioning itself becomes the violation, and maintaining order takes precedence over curiosity or dialogue. Understanding the fighter, the avoider, and the gatekeeper clarified something I hadn't fully grasped before. Street epistemology isn't failing because it's flawed. It's failing because it runs against the grain of what people actually prioritize. People prioritize entertainment, perceived safety, and peace of the group over truth. People who are of these archetypes do not buy into street epistemology. They prefer their established ways. They cannot assist in making street epistemology go viral. The archetypes within us. What I haven't mentioned is that each of the archetypes live inside each of us. Nobody is strictly a fighter or strictly a gatekeeper. People respond differently to different situations, beliefs being challenged, and how they perceive their needs or safety. Adam is not always a fighter. When it comes to discussing religion, he embodied the fourth archetype, calm-minded. The calm-minded person is oriented toward understanding rather than winning, comfort, or control. They can sit with uncertainty, tolerate tension, and explore ideas without treating disagreement as a threat. Why is Adam calm-minded for religion, but a fighter for politics? It comes down to his perceived safety. He understands someone's personal religious belief is unlikely to harm him, his family, or his friends. On the other hand, he perceives political beliefs as a potential safety threat against him, his family, or his friends. Realizing this forced me to confront something uncomfortable about myself. I wasn't just observing these patterns in others. I was participating in them. The same instincts I criticized were present in me, just aimed at different targets. That meant this wasn't a story about them. It was a story about how humans, including me, handle perceived threats. Street epistemology works remarkably well with calm-minded people. I had assumed the method could generate calm-mindedness. It can't. It only functions once it's already there. Revisiting the trigger. Looking back, that moment with my coworker makes more sense than it did at the time. He wasn't available for calm-minded conversation. He wasn't asking to be understood, and he wasn't open to examining his own reasoning. He perceived a threat, whether to his identity or his worldview, and he responded the way fighters often do under threat, aggressively and without curiosity. Calm-mindedness isn't something you force in the moment. Sometimes this means building a stronger relationship with the person or waiting for them to be in a relaxed state. Sometimes calm-mindedness may never become possible for a particular topic and a particular person. This is why street epistemology fails at a global scale. It takes patience to wait for a calm-minded window or build enough trust with a person so they tell their inner fighter to disarm. This isn't something that is worth it to most people. This also isn't something that is rewarded in the brain through feel-good chemicals. Victory is rewarded in the brain. Waiting for the calm after the storm is not. The real limits of street epistemology. Street epistemology doesn't fail because the questions are wrong. It fails because people are rarely available for the kind of calm-minded reflection it requires. Fighters are not interested in examining beliefs while they feel threatened. Avoiders won't risk discomfort. Gatekeepers will shut down the environment before a conversation can even begin. No amount of perfectly phrased questions can override a person in defense mode. This realization forced me to rethink what success even means in a disagreement. My early mistake wasn't impatience or poor technique. I treated every disagreement as if it were an epistemic problem, assuming curiosity was latent and simply needed the right conditions to surface. Experience taught me otherwise. Many disagreements are not about beliefs at all. They are about perceived threats, status, identity, or control. Calm-mindedness isn't something you summon through better questions. It is a temporary psychological state that either exists or does not. When it's absent, pushing for examination doesn't move the conversation forward. It changes the nature of the interaction. What I once interpreted as resistance to good questions was often a signal that the conversation I wanted was not the conversation that was actually happening. Street epistemology works remarkably well, but only when the conditions are right. It does not create calm-mindedness. It depends on it. This isn't a failure of method. It's a constraint of human psychology. Creating safety first. One thing I learned later is that good questions aren't enough if the conversation itself doesn't feel safe. And by safe, I don't mean safe in some objective or moral sense. I mean safe as the other person experiences it. For the purpose of having a real conversation, those two things are the same. If someone feels threatened, socially, morally, or personally, their attention shifts from thinking to defending. At that point, curiosity isn't unavailable because they're stubborn. It's unavailable because they are busy doing something else. That reframes the opening move of a meaningful conversation. Instead of beginning with claims, challenges, or even carefully crafted questions, it may begin with meta questions about the conversation itself. Asking what would make the discussion feel most comfortable, or what topics, tones, or approaches would make it uncomfortable, does more than signal goodwill. It reveals where the perceived threat lines are, what is being protected, and whether calm-mindedness is even possible in that moment. These questions are not about accommodation. They are about determining the mindset of your interlocutor. Safety doesn't always mean agreement, but it often means control over pace and scope. Most people don't need disagreement removed. They need to know it won't ambush them or escalate beyond what they can manage. In those moments, the issue isn't that conversation can't happen. The feeling of safety is missing. When that's missing, reflection shuts down. In the end, the work of conversation is less about clever questions and more about observing the other person and creating the conditions for reflection. Safety, real or perceived, is the gateway to curiosity. If the other person isn't ready, no amount of reasoning will reach them. If they feel threatened, the only productive move is to make the conversation feel manageable without pressure. Street epistemology is the most effective when a sense of safety is achieved. It may not take the world by storm. It doesn't have virality. It won't become the new default. That doesn't mean you can't utilize it.